Good evening. Welcome to our Patriotic concert. The first thing that's going to happen, we're going to have a presentation of the colors by the Virginia Servicemen's Honor Guard under the direction of Cam Jason. And he's going to present the colors, and it'll be followed by our national anthem. So if you are able, please rise for the presentation of colors. Thanks to the Honor Guard for being here tonight. That just adds more to our patriotic concert. We're going to start off with a march called National Emblem March by Bagley. The first time it was ever performed, I read that it's in 1906. And so in this particular march, you're going to hear the Star Spangled Banner again, except it's not like you just heard it. It's in amongst in the low brass. It's a march that's used quite often in military parades. It's also used in military reviews. John Philip Sousa himself called this as one of the top 5 written marches, even though it was written by somebody else. National Emblem March. As with our audience, this patriotic concert is one of our favorites. It's just so much fun to play. It's a repeat of many of the patriotic songs. And we shall continue with that realm with Battle Hymn of the Republic by Peter Wilhowsky. This is a James Nielsen arrangement. Someday maybe we'll have a choir here to sing it too. That's part of this arrangement. But we have the band plays the choir part, so it's a very neat arrangement of the words. By the way, if we had the words, it would be written by Julia Ward. Many biblical references in the words, many messages in it. Many of the messages that we hear today in our news, way back in when this was done during Civil War era, many of the messages are the same as they are today. Neat. Battle Hymn of the Republic. Next, we're going to continue in the same vein, and we're going to do a tune called Rushmore, and it was written by a very famous, more contemporary composer, Alfred Reed, and it was done in 1980, and it was done, of course, at Mount Rushmore. There was a music camp there, and so he wrote this piece of music, and you're going to hear America the Beautiful in it. And so you can just picture, if you've ever been there, and most of us have been, I suppose, and just to see especially the closing ceremonies, how dramatic they are, and that this is what he patterned this after. Rushmore. So this is our fourth concert of the summer. We do 6. On concert number 5 this year, and Ryan will tell you again, remind you in case you forget, that's our ice cream concert next week. So you don't want to miss that one. We're going to continue this concert with a tune called Tribute for Band by Daniel Butterfield. And actually, it's a little take on a very solemn type of a piece of music, and we all know it by the word taps. And so you're going to hear the taps within this tune. These people right here that you see are very often out doing funerals, honor guard funerals, and it is a very moving thing if you've never seen it. I think I've been playing taps for about, I added it up one time, like 60 or 70 years now. So in high school and everything, all the way through, and it never ceases to amaze me that how impressive this is. And it of course, taps were originally written and still are used for honor our military people that pass away and at funerals, etc., and for other occasions also. And so you're in this particular piece of music, along with the taps, you're going to hear Simple Gifts, again, parts of the Star Spangled Banner, Amazing Grace, and Battle Hymn of the Republic again. This was written as a tribute to the men and women of the armed forces. Tribute for Band. For my last tune of my half of the concert, we're going to play a very famous tune called American Patrol by Meacham. You've heard it a million times. It's I remember hearing it, even the Glenn Miller swing arrangement of it, so it has lots of different arrangements. In this piece of music, you're also going to hear Columbia, The Gem of the Ocean, Dixie, and Yankee Doodle as it progresses. So American Patrol. And then there'll be a little pause, and Ryan will come up.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. And what a crowd. This is awesome. Thank you all for being here. Music is meant to be shared, so we're very happy to share with you this evening. The first piece on my half of the concert is Semper Fidelis, John Philip Sousa March, written in 1887. It is named in honor of the Marine Corps, and of course, Semper Fidelis is Latin for always faithful. The story goes that Sousa wrote this song while in tears after hearing the Marine Corps sing their hymn. That was according to him. Also, according to Sousa, I found this interesting. Everyone knows Stars and Stripes Forever and considers it the best march, best Sousa march, and you'll hear that later in a few minutes. But according to Sousa himself, not Stars and Stripes, but Semper Fidelis was the best march he ever wrote, according to him. That's his opinion, but, that is the composer. So that was just an interesting fact. Hope you enjoyed as well. Semper Fidelis. Our next piece is not patriotic as it is just good old-fashioned fun. I've really come to love this suite of pieces. The Home Front, Musical Memories from World War II, is a suite of music from that era. Included in here is It's Been a Long, Long Time, Thanks for the Memory, Bell-Bottom Trousers, There'll Be Bluebirds Over the White Cliffs of Dover, I'll Be Seeing You, my favorite, Don't Sit Under That Apple Tree with Anyone Else But Me, and Praise the Lord and Pass the Ammunition. Enjoy. At this time, we would like to recognize our military service members with this next piece. The Armed Forces Salute contains all 5 branches of the military's songs. When you hear your song, please stand so we may recognize you. And announcing the songs will be Dr. Cam Jason, Commander of the Virginia Servicemen's Honor Guard.
The United States Army. The United States Coast Guard. The United States Marine Corps. The United States Air Force. The United States Navy.
The next piece we're going to play is not American per se, but it has become highly associated with America, especially this time of year, as a celebratory piece for Independence Day. The 1812 Overture by Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. He was a Russian composer, and he wrote this piece in the height of the Romantic era of music. So this music is programmatic music, which means that the musical elements, themes, even specific instruments represent characters or events or certain pieces that are directly meant to represent something. And if we had a half an hour, I'd tell you all about all the the historical parts of what's happening during this part of the piece and whatnot. You can research those on your own if you are interested. It was originally written for full orchestra, and it was written by Tchaikovsky to commemorate Napoleon's retreat from Moscow in 1812. The work contains nationalistic themes from Russia. It also contains a few French themes to represent them. And the original work, of course, was supposed to be accompanied by cannon fire, and we have a cannon of sorts back there that you'll hear in a bit. Tchaikovsky is also known for the Nutcracker, for the Sleeping Beauty, and Swan Lake ballets. This piece is pretty much beloved by all, except for Tchaikovsky. Maybe you've heard this before, maybe you haven't, but Tchaikovsky hated this thing. He wrote, and this is a direct quote, he wrote that this piece is very loud and noisy and completely without artistic merit, obviously written without warmth or love. He despised this thing, and he'd probably be really mad to know how well it's received nowadays. Basically, he did this for the paycheck. He didn't like writing music for ceremony, and he did not think this thing was any good. We disagree. You probably will too. Hope you enjoy the 1812 Overture. I should have told you before that piece, but I'll tell you now that you might want to turn off your hearing assisted devices. Might not be a bad idea. As Bill said, and I'll remind you again, normally the ice cream reserved for the last concert will be at our next concert next week. So definitely come back for some tasty treats. Before we play Stars and Stripes Forever, just so you know, the Honor Guard will retire the colors when we are done playing. So after you're done applauding, please stay standing while the Color Guard retires the colors. As we always do, we will end with Stars and Stripes Forever, Sousa's most well-known composition, the official march of the USA, and of course featuring our flute and piccolo players. Thank you for joining us this evening. Have a safe and happy 4th of July. We have 2 more concerts after this, so we hope to see you at those ones. Thank you very much.